The Polish economy is emerging from a slowdown. Real GDP growth is projected to rebound to 2.8% in 2024. Private consumption is expected to be the main growth catalyst, supported by increasing wages and additional government social support boosting disposable income.
And now I'd like to welcome to the studio to discuss the developments in the Polish economy, Raffaella Tenconi. She's the chief economist at Wood & Company. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. It's delightful to be with you.
Now, it's hard to kind of put a finger on it right at this moment, but based on the low GDP growth that we've seen last year, would you say that Poland is in a state of economic decline or a state of economic growth as we look forward towards 2024?
I would characterize it as being the first part of a new business cycle. So the economy was weak last year. Of course, it's also the effect of monetary tightening. Exports slowed down, particularly acute last year, and still stagnating. But when you look forward into 2024, you're beginning to see consumption definitely rebounding. You will eventually see exports and investment reaccelerating. So I would say that you're in the acceleration phase at the very beginning of that phase.
Now, what about how has the war in Ukraine impacted Poland? Would you say it has been a burden on the Polish economy, or has it provided some economic opportunities?
Well, I mean, it's both. In a sense, it is clearly a burden because of the inflationary cost that the war has directly and indirectly, including the extra refugees that had to accommodate, and of course the complexity and the sadness of the war. But it is going to be an opportunity because there are more people in Poland. I mean, we do live in an age of negative demographics. And of course, eventually there will be the rebuilding of Ukraine, which will definitely benefit Poland as other countries.
Right, and if we talk about demographics, that's also an interesting situation that we have here in Poland. We're seeing the lowest unemployment that we've ever experienced in the last 30 plus years since the end of communism. Therefore, do you think that Poland is going to really have to increase its efforts at migration in order to fulfill this? What happens if unemployment falls even lower and it's difficult to find workers?
So, in the near term, so when you look at up to 2 years, it's hard to see the unemployment rate going even lower, to be honest. It's at some point you're structurally at the low point. But what you see is that wage pressure is high as it is now and tends to exceed productivity. In the longer term, how do you address that problem? It's a matter for voters and policymakers to decide. Some degree of immigration is helpful. You can then choose what kind of immigration you want, but in general, the more people live in a country, the better it is for its performance. I mean, of course, unless you go into exaggerated terms. I mean, there is, of course, an equally important question about having fertility eventually going up and having women and families being able to handle a modern life with the joy of a family in a way that doesn't destroy women's ability to cope with all of this stress. But it's a question of time frame and, of course, priorities. Immigration is relatively easy in the near term in the sense that you take workers that already have skills. Boosting fertility is going to be the task of the next 20 years, right?
Certainly.
So I have a question based on what you just said. Do you think that enough is being done, what you just mentioned, by, well, the government of Poland or in the Central Eastern Europe countries, to allow young families to be able to balance this modern life with having a family?
I think Poland is a very good country in many respects to balance family life. And it's also structurally supported by the fact that it's still a convergence country. So wages at every point of the income distributions are going up. So that makes the whole thing easier to manage. But as a woman, an entrepreneur and a mother, I would say we're very far behind of tackling this issue. And part of the reason is that the priorities of women and around families are never reaching the top. So the suggestions that we have in terms of policy are always short-term fixes and largely addressing poverty. So as you know, today we have the lowest unemployment in history, not just in Poland, in the EU and in the US, and yet we have the highest incidence of poverty among children. So measures like payments to families reduce the burden of poverty. But then you would need to go to the next level of sophistication, which is you probably need more investment to balance life. And when I say women policy, it's just because women are kind of the key agent here, but they're really family policies, right? So ability to work more flexibly, increasing financial literacy, and a lot of other relatively boring policies to some extent, but extremely important. For example, I mean, one of the major burdens that on women participation on labor is the availability of housekeeping and babysitting facilities, which as we age, the supply of that is restricted. And it's also very often in the black market. So these changes generally give you an enormous amount of positive economic effects, but we don't have enough women that can raise the voice and are in the key rooms to make this a real priority.
Well, in terms of flexibility, would you say that what we experienced during the pandemic has been, well, a positive change? It's allowed more flexibility and to work, say, from home or to work in different ways than previously was available before COVID?
Yes, definitely. We've moved forward, but at the moment we're almost stalling. Let's talk about the housing market, actually, which is a broad issue for everybody. So, especially in Poland, for example, you have a surge of housing prices, especially in the cities. And this is due for a range of reasons, and it's really hard to actually tackle it, right? I mean, you just have more businesses being here, so value of houses is going to go up. But from a long-term perspective, ideally you want to make sure that you developed, the regions around the big cities so that people can function and have normal living costs and kindergartens and all of the rest of the supply and maybe commute to work more easily.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what about, there's one thing I want to ask, something that a discussion that we have here in Poland, because back in 2004, when Poland joined the EU, of course, it became legally bound to eventually join the Eurozone. But experts are saying that Poland is not ready to take this step. Can Poland, like the Czech Republic, perpetually keep on moving this moment when it does enter the Eurozone in time? Is it something that the country can afford?
You can do anything you want in life, so in many respects, yes, you can continue to delay for a very long time. So a very long time can be maybe even 20 years. At some point, the convergence is going to be so evident that you would probably need to ask for a treaty adjustment if you don't want to enter. But, I mean, having seen the EU from its inception and different countries trying to enter the EU in different ways, I think right now the practical barrier of Poland being more closer to decision-making in the EU is literally the policy-making of Poland. Because the EU is a highly complex system, and there is an initial barrier because you need to really understand all of the legislation and all of the political lobbying in it. But once you are a big country like Poland is, thriving, then it's a matter of your political skill to impose what makes sense for your country in the long term. And once you get good at it, really, there is upside in being into the euro area because we live in a world where if you have a currency that is a world reserve, it does offer tremendous amounts of benefits.
Right, but for the time being, is Poland right in keeping zloty instead of trying to make the jump, if you will,
Yes.
into the euro? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you finally about switch gears a little bit, and it seems to me, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that Europe is betting really big on the Green Deal as a source of innovation and growth for its economies. Do you think this plan will live up to its expectations? Do you think this is the right focus that the European Union should have for dynamic growth in the years and decades ahead?
So I think you can find consensus that the climate is changing. And there is disagreement on whether you can influence it, but it's certainly changing. And that is creating costs, economic costs and livelihood costs, because of the higher frequency of changes in pattern of weather. So from a legislative point of view, the EU has already made enormous amount of steps. So the green transition is already there. It's a matter of how fast you're going to invest and whether you're going to invest fast enough to really mitigate the overall economic cost of climate change, or whether you're going to be essentially always behind the curve. Is it correct? I think we are at this stage in the point of this transition where we have settled on the ideas. We would like to have more renewables at some point, right? We will have better insulated houses, things like this. But it's still up for discussion on whether the solutions that we have chosen genuinely should be implemented exactly like that and exactly in that timing. And another very important thing is on the pricing of electricity going forward. And that's where I would say is the biggest area of analysis that needs to happen for citizens and for policymakers. Because the easy answer is that more renewable energy will bring down the cost of energy for consumers. That is not the case. In the long run, the price of energy is at best staying as it is, or probably going up, because renewables will never cover 100% of your energy needs. You will always need about a 20 to 30%, and the price of that 20% is skyrocketing. Okay? So that, I think, is the toughest part of the transition in order of implementation of the grids, implementation of the AI that you need to manage this, and communicating to people that this is what is happening without misleading them. Because when you mislead citizens, then they really tend to not enjoy that experience. So I think that's where all of my attention is.
Interesting. Well, we'll have to see how that develops. It certainly will be interesting to see which measures may be delayed and which measures may be implemented maybe even more quicker. Raffaella Tenconi, Chief Economist at Wood Company, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.